Thomas collapsed on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., and that's when their nightmare truly began. Not the fall itself, though the broken hip and $47,000 in medical bills nearly destroyed them. Not even selling their beloved home of 42 years to save their son Michael's family from foreclosure. The nightmare started when Margaret overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. Words spoken in the darkness by the daughter-in-law they'd saved. Once we have them declared incompetent, everything they have left becomes ours to control. 3 years after losing their youngest son, David, to war in Syria, Margaret and Thomas were about to discover that the cruelest battles aren't fought overseas. Sometimes they happen in your own son's kitchen at midnight, planned by family who see you not as people, but as problems to be eliminated. This is the story of what happened when two elderly parents refused to become victims, when dignity mattered more than security, when starting over at 73 felt less terrifying than surrendering their freedom. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button. If you're ready, let me take you to the most gripping moment of this story, the night everything changed. 3 years after David's death, Michael's software startup collapsed during the tech downturn. The bank sent foreclosure warnings on both his office space and the condo where his wife, Alexis, had insisted they stretch their budget. When Michael confessed his troubles during one of their weekly dinners, Margaret watched him stare at his untouched plate. "We could refinance," Margaret suggested carefully. "Take a second mortgage to help you through this." Thomas, 73 and recovering from a stroke that had left his right side weakened, managed to shake his head. "We don't have that kind of equity anymore, Maggie." The medical bills. Margaret knew he was right. The stroke, the rehabilitation, the modifications to their home. Their savings had evaporated, but watching her son's business crumble felt unbearable. "We could sell," she heard herself say. "Downsize to something smaller." The words hung in the air like smoke. 6 weeks later, they signed papers transferring enough money to save Michael's condo and give his business a lifeline. Not enough to save the company, but enough to prevent complete catastrophe. Margaret packed her mother's china, Thomas dismantled his drafting table, and their golden retriever, Scout, watched with anxious eyes as their world disappeared into boxes. Michael's guest room had clearly been designed as a home office. Desk built into the wall, shelves for tech manuals, a daybed that seemed apologetic about its own existence. Their remaining possessions filled half the garage, behind Alexis's Peloton bike and Christmas decorations for a house with cathedral ceilings. Alexis managed a gracious first month. She arranged flowers, cooked Margaret's favorite roasted chicken, smiled when 7-year-old Sophie and 5-year-old Lucas raced in for morning hugs with their grandparents. But cracks appeared quickly. "I never agreed to a multi-generational household," Margaret overheard Alexis telling someone on the phone while chopping vegetables. "It's not what I signed up for." Thomas's rehabilitation equipment, a walker, a cane, resistance bands, migrated from the living room to the garage to finally behind the water heater. "We need the space to flow better," Alexis explained with a tight smile. Meals became minefields. "Thomas, you're welcome to seconds, though my nutritionist says men your age really should watch their portions." Or, "Margaret, I've switched us to oat milk." Regular dairy can accelerate cognitive decline in seniors. Michael witnessed these moments with visible discomfort, but offered only weak protests that died under his wife's sharp glances. The children remained bright spots. Sophie would slip into their room after school. "Grandma, can you help me with my reading?" Lucas brought broken toys for Grandpa's magic fixing. The crisis came 4 months in. Thomas woke at 2 a.m. needing the bathroom. His weakened right side made nighttime navigation treacherous. His foot caught on a yoga mat Alexis had left there, sending him crashing against the doorframe. Lights blazed on. Michael appeared. Children peeked from doorways. Alexis emerged last, blonde hair perfect despite the hour, mouth pressed in a bloodless line. "This is exactly what I was worried about," she said. The next day, Alexis scheduled an assessment with a company specializing in senior safety modifications. The consultant made recommendations that somehow always involved restricting Thomas and Margaret's movements rather than improving accessibility. "We could implement a bathroom schedule," the young woman suggested brightly, "or perhaps incontinence products would be appropriate." Thomas sat on their bed that night, shoulders slumped. "I never thought I'd become a burden to my own son." "You are not a burden," Margaret said firmly. But doubt crept in. Each week brought new evidence they weren't wanted. Invitations to family outings mysteriously excluded them. Conversations halted when they entered rooms. Most telling was when Sophie asked at dinner, "Mommy, why do you make that face when Grandma hugs me?" Alexis's smile froze. "What face, sweetheart?" "Like when I eat Brussels sprouts and pretend to like them," Lucas added. The table fell silent. 5 months in, they'd become experts at invisibility, retreating to their room, taking Scout for long walks, learning which floorboards creaked and which times were safest for using the kitchen. Then came the conversation that changed everything. At 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, Margaret woke to voices drifting through the heating vent. Michael and Alexis in the kitchen below. "I've already spoken to Evergreen Manor," Alexis was saying. "It's perfect for their needs." Margaret nudged Thomas gently, pressed a finger to her lips, pointed downward. $3,800 a month, Alexis continued. "Their Medicare won't cover it all, but here's the thing. Once we establish guardianship for diminished capacity, we manage their finances. Dr. Chen agrees Thomas's post-stroke depression and Margaret's forgetfulness provide grounds." "Guardianship?" Michael's voice sounded uncertain. "Based on what?" "Dr. Chen has been documenting everything. The bathroom incident, Margaret's memory issues, Thomas's mobility problems. It's enough." "You've discussed my parents with our doctor without telling me?" "Someone had to take initiative. Look, once guardianship is established, their Social Security, Thomas's pension, the insurance payout from selling their house, it all comes to us to manage. Alexis, they gave us everything to save our home." "Exactly. And look where it got us, stuck with them 24/7. I can't even have book club here anymore. I won't spend my prime years as a caretaker. The lawyer says we can move quickly with medical documentation." Silence. "When were you planning to tell me about this?" "I'm telling you now. The appointment is Thursday." In their darkened room, Margaret and Thomas lay frozen, hands clasped so tightly both went numb. "She's planning to have us declared incompetent," Thomas whispered, "to control everything we have left." "Elder abuse," Margaret agreed. They sat in stunned silence as betrayal settled around them. "What do we do?" Margaret whispered. "We leave." "Leave where?" "Anywhere. With whatever we can carry. I'd rather sleep in a shelter than watch you declared incompetent by that woman." Margaret's shock gave way to calculation. "We have some emergency cash, and I've been doing alterations for the boutique on 5th. Haven't told Alexis about that income." "When?" 3 days. Gather what we need, then disappear before they can take our freedom." They spent those 3 days in dual reality, outwardly normal while secretly preparing. Margaret withdrew her alteration income, converted remaining jewelry to cash through a consignment shop. Thomas quietly said goodbyes at the community center where he'd been volunteering. Most heartbreaking were preparations for the grandchildren. Thomas carved a small wooden lighthouse for Lucas. Margaret baked Sophie's favorite lemon cookies, writing out the recipe in careful handwriting. On the third night, at midnight, they executed their escape. 2 small suitcases, essential medications, copies of important documents, David's military photo, a thumb drive of digitized family pictures. Scout sensed the unusual activity, whimpering softly as they attached his leash. They navigated the dark hallway, avoiding the creaking board outside Michael's room. Paused at each grandchild's door, Thomas placing the lighthouse on Lucas's dresser, Margaret leaving cookies and the recipe for Sophie. Descended the stairs in sock feet, moving like shadows. Thomas placed his house key on the kitchen counter. A symbolic surrender. At 12:15 a.m., they slipped out through the garage side door and disappeared into the September night. The night bus arrived at 1:15 a.m., its pneumatic doors hissing open to reveal a weary driver who barely registered the elderly couple boarding with their dog. "Service animal?" he asked automatically, nodding toward Scout. "Emotional support for my PTSD," Thomas replied, straightening to his full height despite exhaustion. The driver waved them through, too tired to verify. They settled near the back, Scout curling at their feet as the bus pulled away from the only neighborhood they'd known for months. Margaret watched Michael's street recede through grimy windows until darkness swallowed it completely. "Where to?" Thomas asked quietly. "Anywhere with a bench and warmth until morning," Margaret replied. "Then we think clearly." "We don't know anything about anywhere right now," Margaret countered, "but Rosa vouched for him, and a free ride saves us bus fare." Frank's pickup truck was well maintained, with a spacious extended cab. Scout hopped in back as if he'd been riding in trucks his whole life, settling on a blanket Frank produced. "He can use that. Seen worse than dog hair." As urban sprawl gave way to rolling countryside, Frank finally spoke. "So, what's your story?" Margaret recognized the value of limited honesty. "Our son's wife decided we were inconvenient. She was planning to have us declared incompetent, institutionalized, while taking control of our assets." Frank nodded grimly. "Financial elder abuse. More common than people think." "We gave them everything," Thomas added bitterly. "Sold our home to save theirs." "Family can be the cruelest betrayers," Frank observed. "They know exactly where to plant the knife." As miles accumulated, conversation flowed more naturally. Frank revealed he was a widower. Wife died of cancer 6 years earlier. No children. Now it was just him and his mother, 87, beginning to show signs of dementia. "I'm on the road most weeks," he explained. "Neighbors check in, and I pay someone to clean and stock her fridge. But I've been considering assisted living lately. She's forgetting to turn off the stove, wandering outside at night." "That's why we ran," Thomas said quietly. "We'd rather face uncertainty than lose our independence against our will." They stopped at rest areas where Scout could stretch his legs. During one such break, Margaret overheard Frank on the phone, canceling some previous arrangement, reconsidering options, trying a different approach. Around noon, they stopped at a weathered diner called Rose's Place. Inside, an elderly woman with improbably dark hair approached, greeting Frank by name. "Long time, stranger. Your usual table's open." Rose Patterson, 78 and proprietor for 50 years, assessed them with shrewd eyes. "Friends of yours, Frank?" "Getting there," he replied. Over meatloaf that tasted like home, Rose lingered at their table. "You folks just passing through?" "We're between chapters," Margaret answered carefully. "Looking for somewhere to write the next one." Rose nodded knowingly. "Been there myself. Husband died, kids moved away, thought my story was finished. Turns out it was just changing direction." She gestured around. "Been running this place alone 30 years. Not what I planned, but it's a good life." "How did you know to keep going?" Margaret asked. "Sometimes you got to lose everything to find out what you're really worth. The stripping away hurts like hell, but afterward you see what's left is the real you." She patted Margaret's hand. "And honey, the real you is always enough." When they tried to pay, Rose refused. "Frank saved my grandson from going to jail after a stupid teenage mistake. His meals are on the house. That extends to his friends." Late afternoon brought a phone call that changed Frank's demeanor. he answered with obvious tension. Yes, I understand it's short notice, but circumstances have changed. No, she's still declining, but I'm reconsidering options. When he disconnected, silence filled the truck. Frank cleared his throat. That was Sunny Pines Assisted Living. I had a room reserved for my mother starting tomorrow. You're putting your mother in a home? Thomas asked carefully. Was, Frank corrected. Just canceled it. Why? Margaret asked softly. Because watching you two fight for your dignity reminded me there are other ways. Called my dispatcher earlier, taking regional routes instead of long haul. Less money, but more nights at home. Thinking about moving in with her instead of the other way around. As sunset painted the sky amber and rose, Millbrook appeared, a small town nestled in a valley, church spires rising above two-story buildings lining Main Street. Street lamps flickered on, creating pools of golden light. Welcome to Millbrook, Frank announced. Population 847. They drove down Main Street, classic small-town thoroughfare with brick buildings from the early 1900s. Many storefronts showed "For Lease" signs, but others displayed life. A hardware store with rocking chairs on the sidewalk, a bookshop with lights on, a barber shop where elderly men gathered after hours. Frank pointed out landmarks: the limestone columned library, the courthouse, the volunteer fire department that doubled as a community center. Best food in 3 counties, he said, indicating Dorothy's kitchen. Dorothy serves breakfast all day and makes pies people drive 50 miles for. 2 blocks beyond, they reached the Millbrook Inn, a modest motel that had seen better days but maintained tidy appearance. Let me check for a ground-floor room, Frank offered, considering Thomas's mobility issues. He returned with keys. $38 a night, includes basic breakfast. I explained about Scout, $10 pet deposit, but the owner likes dogs. As they unloaded, exhaustion hit fully. The adrenaline sustaining them through escape and journey was depleted. Frank scribbled his number on a receipt. I'm at my mother's house on Elm Street. Yellow Victorian with blue trim. Call if you need anything. I'll check on you tomorrow. The room was basic but clean. 2 double beds with floral bedspreads, small table and chairs, dresser with an old TV, bathroom with avocado fixtures that had outlived design trends. Scout circled twice before collapsing with a contented sigh. Thomas sank onto the bed. What have we done, Margaret? She sat beside him. Exactly what we had to. No one will declare us incompetent here, but we might starve instead. We're in a town we don't know, with limited funds, no medical care, no income, and winter coming. We're together. We have our dignity. We'll figure out the rest. Outside, crickets began their evening chorus. Wind chimes sounded somewhere nearby. Despite unfamiliar surroundings, they followed routines established through decades: medications, teeth brushing, nightclothes. As they lay in darkness, Margaret admitted, I keep thinking about the children. Sophie will be so confused. I hope they'll remember us kindly, Thomas sighed, that Alexis won't poison their memories. Try to sleep, Margaret murmured. As they drifted off, beneath exhaustion and uncertainty, something unexpected took root, a tiny seed of possibility. Dawn arrived with disorienting brightness. For several moments, Margaret lay still, piecing together reality from memory fragments. The midnight escape, Frank's truck, Millbrook's quiet streets. They were homeless seniors in an unknown town with limited resources. Yet sunshine streamed through curtains, casting optimistic patterns. Scout stretched lazily, tail thumping. Thomas's breathing remained deep, the first truly restful sleep in months. Margaret slipped from bed, padding to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, silver hair uncombed, face lined with fatigue, eyes shadowed. We are not finished yet, she told her reflection firmly. After washing up, she dressed and took Scout for a brief walk. Morning revealed more of their temporary home, a covered pool, modest garden with benches, breakfast room where coffee beckoned. The motel owner, a wiry man in his 60s named Howard Jenkins, greeted her warmly. "You must be Mrs. Henderson. Frank called this morning to check you settled okay." He gestured to a simple buffet. "Help yourself. Coffee's fresh." She returned with coffee and muffins. Thomas was awake, moving cautiously. "Sleep well?" she asked. He nodded. "Better than expected. You?" "Well enough." Frank called to check on us. They ate quietly, gazing at Millbrook awakening. Morning traffic consisted of older trucks and sedans, drivers waving casually to pedestrians. "What's our plan?" Thomas finally asked. "First, understand this place. See what opportunities exist. Frank mentioned Dorothy's Kitchen as a community hub. We start there, and we need a pharmacy and bank." By mid-morning, they'd addressed pressing concerns. The local pharmacy could transfer prescriptions, though without insurance, costs would be substantial. Millbrook Community Bank opened a basic account with minimal paperwork. Howard agreed to a weekly rate that stretched funds further. Each small accomplishment bolstered confidence. They weren't helpless. Around 11 a.m., they made their way to Dorothy's Kitchen. The establishment occupied a converted Victorian storefront, large windows offering views of the town square. Inside, decor blended nostalgic 1950s elements with personality: red vinyl booths, gleaming counter with swivel stools, checkerboard floor, but local artwork adorned walls, fresh flowers graced tables, hand-lettered specials featured creative offerings. The lunch crowd was gathering. Locals in work clothes, a few business people, seniors enjoying unhurried meals. They found a booth near the window, Scout curling beneath the table. Their server approached, a woman perhaps 65, with silver-streaked auburn hair in a practical bun and reading glasses on a beaded chain. Her name tag, Dorothy. "You must be Frank's friends," she said. "He called to say you might stop by." Her direct gaze assessed with interest rather than suspicion. "What can I get you to drink?" They ordered iced tea and studied menus featuring comfort food with unexpected twists: meatloaf with roasted red peppers, 3-cheese mac and cheese, carrot ginger bisque. When Dorothy returned, she lingered. "Frank mentioned you're considering Millbrook for retirement. Smart choice. Cost of living's reasonable, weather's not too extreme, and we're just far enough from the interstate to stay quiet without being isolated." "We're exploring options," Thomas replied carefully. "We've downsized recently." Dorothy nodded sagely. "Millbrook's definitely different. Not for everyone. We don't have shopping malls or movie theaters, but we've got community, clean air, and housing prices that won't give you a heart attack." As they ate excellent sandwiches, they observed the diner's rhythm. Dorothy greeted most patrons by name, asked about family members, remembered preferences without prompting. "This is the town's living room," Margaret murmured. "Notice how people linger?" Tables get pushed together as friends arrive. Business gets conducted over pie. When they finished, Dorothy returned with their check and an unexpected question. "I don't suppose either of you has food service experience." "I managed our church's community dinners for 15 years, Margaret offered, "and I've always baked extensively." "My morning baker quit yesterday, moving near her daughter's new baby, and my handyman retired last month after hip surgery." She glanced at Thomas. "Frank mentioned you're good with your hands?" "I managed maintenance for our church and community center for decades," Thomas acknowledged. "Tell you what, if you're interested in part-time work while you explore Millbrook, I could use help. Nothing formal at first, just cash to start, see if we suit each other." "We're staying at the motel currently," Margaret mentioned. "Transportation could be challenging." "I've got an apartment upstairs that's been empty since my son moved to Seattle." Nothing fancy, but clean and furnished. Comes with the job if you want it. Rent would be reasonable, save you motel costs." "Could we see it?" Thomas asked. "Of course. Let me finish the lunch rush, then I'll show you." As Dorothy moved away, Thomas and Margaret conferred in low voices. "It seems too perfect," Thomas murmured. "Frank clearly spoke to her about us," Margaret reasoned, "but the needs seem genuine. I watched her this morning. She's running this place practically single-handed, and an apartment would solve our housing crisis, stretch our funds considerably. Plus, give us purpose," Margaret added. By early afternoon, Dorothy led them through a side door and up narrow stairs. The apartment revealed itself as surprisingly spacious. Living area with windows overlooking the town square, comfortable sofa, reading chairs, solid oak dining table. The compact kitchen featured newer appliances and ample counter space. Down a short hallway, updated bathroom and bedroom large enough for a queen bed and dresser. Throughout, hardwood floors gleamed and warm cream walls created welcome. "My son lived here after college until he married and moved away," Dorothy explained. "I've rented it occasionally to seasonal workers, but lately it's been empty." Shame wasting good space. Thomas examined details with professional interest: solid construction, well-maintained woodwork, updated electrical. "The building has good bones," he observed approvingly. Dorothy beamed. 1,896 construction. They built things to last. Margaret was drawn to the kitchen. "This is lovely for baking." "Apartment comes with utilities included," Dorothy added. "Heat's central, air conditioning is window units but adequate. Laundry's in the basement, and I don't mind dogs if they're well behaved." Dorothy outlined her proposal. Margaret would handle morning baking starting 5 a.m., preparing bread, muffins, and pastries. Thomas would maintain the building, addressing repairs as needed, generally mornings with afternoons free. Both part-time, paid hourly, with reduced apartment rent factored as partial compensation. "It's not wealth building," she acknowledged, "but honest work for fair pay and a decent place to live. Plus all the coffee you can drink and 1 meal per shift." "We'd like to discuss it privately," Thomas said. "Of course." "I'm downstairs if you have questions." After she left, they weighed options. "It would reduce expenses significantly," Thomas calculated. "Motel's nearly $40 daily. That's over $250 weekly saved, plus meals included." "And it's not charity," Margaret emphasized. "It's employment we're qualified for, with housing as part of compensation. It's not what we planned for retirement. Plans change, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity, but we're still together, still capable, still needed." "What about medical care?" "We'll ask Dorothy about local physicians. Small towns always have doctors. They recognized the opportunity before them offered the best immediate solution." When they descended, Dorothy looked up expectantly. "We'd like to accept," Thomas announced, "on a trial basis, 1 month to ensure the arrangement works for everyone." "Fair enough. When would you like to start?" "Tomorrow, if that works. We'll need today to collect our things." "I'll have the apartment ready by this evening. 5 a.m. for Margaret, 7 a.m. for Thomas tomorrow." Walking back to the motel, Millbrook revealed itself through afternoon activities: mail carriers greeting residents by name, children riding bicycles without parental hovering, elderly couples strolling at measured pace. "It reminds me of where I grew up," Margaret observed. At the motel, Howard expressed genuine pleasure. "Dorothy's a fair employer and decent landlord. You folks landed on your feet." They packed, settled their bill, and waited for Frank, who'd offered to drive them back with their luggage. He arrived precisely when promised. "Dorothy says you start tomorrow," he commented while loading bags. "She doesn't offer that apartment to just anyone. You must have impressed her." "Or she's desperate for help," Thomas suggested. "Bit of both, probably. But it's a good match. She needs reliable people. You need stability. Sometimes the universe aligns things. By evening, they were settled in the apartment. Dorothy had stocked the refrigerator with basics and left peach cobbler with a welcome note. Standing at twilight by their windows, watching Millbrook's lights illuminate against deepening blue, Thomas slipped an arm around Margaret's waist. "Not where we expected to be," he acknowledged, "but not without promise." "A new chapter," she agreed. "Let's see what tomorrow brings." 3 months later, their first weeks unfolded with unexpected grace. The work suited them perfectly. Margaret rediscovered joy creating breads and pastries that brought smiles to customers' faces, while Thomas found satisfaction maintaining the historic building. Dorothy proved an excellent employer, fair, appreciative, respectful of their age, without treating them as fragile. The diner's regulars welcomed them with small-town curiosity tempered by politeness. Questions about their past were general rather than probing, and vague answers about downsizing were accepted without suspicion. Frank visited regularly, often bringing his mother, Ella Morrison, a bright-eyed woman whose occasional confusion was managed with gentle redirection. His decision to remain in her home with increased presence seemed working well. "I sleep better knowing Mom's under the same roof," Frank confided to Thomas one morning. By month's end, Dorothy made it official. "I'd like to make the arrangement permanent. You've exceeded expectations. Customers love Margaret's baking, and Thomas has fixed things I didn't even know were broken." "We'd like that," Margaret answered for both. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us where we need to be," Dorothy observed. "I know something about that myself." Overcoming weeks, Dorothy's story emerged in fragments. Difficult marriage ended by her husband's sudden death, adult children scattered to distant cities, the diner becoming both livelihood and purpose during lonely years. "We create family where we find it," she told Margaret one morning. "Blood ties are just one kind of connection." The observation resonated as Thomas and Margaret gradually integrated into Millbrook's community fabric. They joined the library's book club, attended concerts in the park, accepted dinner invitations. Thomas met Samuel Ross, 71, a retired furniture maker who still maintained a workshop. The men bonded over woodworking techniques, and Samuel offered access to his tools, a generosity that brought tears to Thomas's eyes the first time he held a properly weighted chisel again. "Been looking for someone who appreciates quality craftsmanship," Samuel explained. Under Samuel's mentorship, Thomas began restoring antique furniture for locals, small projects utilizing his skills while accommodating physical limitations. The modest income supplemented their diner wages, but more importantly, it reconnected him with his lifelong passion. Margaret similarly expanded beyond morning baking. She joined a quilting circle at the community center, sharing techniques accumulated over decades. When the elementary school sought volunteers for after-school reading, she offered her time, soon becoming a favorite with children who called her Grandma Margaret. Scout thrived where his presence was welcomed rather than tolerated. Dorothy allowed him downstairs during slower periods, where he became the diner's unofficial greeter. "That dog's better therapy than most professionals," Dorothy observed after Scout spent an afternoon beside Mr. Jenkins, a widower whose grief often left him silent. Their apartment became truly homelike as they gradually acquired modest possessions, better reading lamp, throw pillows in Margaret's favorite blue, small radio for kitchen companionship during early baking hours. Not replacing what was lost, but creating something new reflecting current circumstances. Financial stability increased as their reputation for reliability spread. Thomas received more furniture restoration requests than he could accommodate. Margaret's special order baked goods, particularly cinnamon rolls and seasonal pies, generated extra income during holidays. They opened a savings account, making small but regular deposits. Not enough to recapture previous security, but sufficient to reduce anxiety about immediate survival. They established care with local physicians who adjusted medications, improving Thomas's mobility and Margaret's arthritis symptoms. By October, when early snow dusted Millbrook briefly before melting, they'd become fixtures in the community. The unexpected visitor. One Tuesday in late November, as Margaret prepared the day's bread in pre-dawn darkness, she noticed unusual activity outside. A car with out-of-state plates circling the town square repeatedly, as if the driver was searching for something. She thought nothing of it until the lunch rush, when the bell above the door jangled and a familiar figure entered. Michael Thornfield stood in the doorway. Margaret, emerging from the kitchen with fresh pie, froze mid-step. Thomas, returning through the side entrance, stopped abruptly. His hand tightened on the doorframe. For several heartbeats, no one moved. The diner's ambient sounds, coffee percolating, conversations, utensils on plates, seemed to recede as father and son regarded each other across unexpected distance. Dorothy, reading the situation, quietly motioned remaining customers toward the register. "Folks, we've got a private matter here. How about I cash you out with 20% off?" Within minutes, the diner cleared, leaving only Dorothy, who retreated to the kitchen after a supportive nod toward Thomas and Margaret. Michael removed his coat with slow, deliberate movements, as if concerned sudden gestures might trigger flight. He looked older than 3 months should account for, new lines around his eyes, certain heaviness in his posture. "Hello, Mom. Dad?" His voice carried relief and apprehension. "It took a while to find you." Thomas found his voice first. "How did you—" "Private investigator initially, then veteran networks. Someone remembered Frank helping an elderly couple with a golden retriever. The trail led here." Margaret remained silent, questions crowding her mind. Had Alexis sent him? As if reading her thoughts, Michael added, "I'm alone. Alexis doesn't know I'm here." Some tension released from Thomas's posture. "Why are you here, then?" "Could we sit?" It's been a long drive. Maternal instinct had Margaret reaching for the coffee pot as they settled across from each other, the familiar action providing refuge from emotional turbulence. "You're looking well," Michael finally offered. "Both of you, healthy." "We are well," Thomas confirmed. "I can see that. This town, it suits you somehow." "The children?" Margaret couldn't contain the inquiry. "They miss you terribly. Sophie asks every day when you're coming home. Lucas keeps your carved lighthouse on his nightstand." "We didn't want to leave them," Thomas said quietly, "but we couldn't stay. Not after what we overheard." "I know what Alexis was planning. I didn't know the full extent until after you left. The lawyer appointments, competency hearing arrangements. She'd orchestrated everything without telling me details." "You knew enough," Thomas observed. "And you didn't stop it." "No," Michael admitted. "I was weak. Caught between loyalty to you and fear of losing my marriage, my family's stability. I chose poorly." "What happened after we left?" Margaret asked. "Chaos initially. Alexis was furious, not worried, furious. Her plans were derailed, and she hated losing control. The children were devastated, especially when Alexis tried convincing them you'd abandoned them because you didn't love them anymore." "She said that to them?" Margaret's voice broke. "She tried. But Sophie's smarter than that. She said, 'Grandma would never stop loving me.' Something bad must have happened." A ghost of a smile touched Michael's lips. "Out of the mouths of babes, right?" Margaret's tears spilled over. "I started searching immediately," Michael continued, "but discreetly, told Alexis it was to reassure the children, but truthfully, I needed to know you were safe. That's when I discovered how extensive her planning had been." Thomas leaned forward. "Explain." "She'd been documenting supposed evidence of your decline for months. Notes about Mom's memory lapses, your depression, medication confusion. She'd consulted an elder law attorney specializing in guardianship. Had appointments scheduled with Dr. Chen for medical support. The financial aspect? Margaret pressed. She'd researched how to redirect your Social Security, pension, insurance proceeds, everything into accounts she'd control as guardian. When I confronted her with her notes, she didn't even deny it. Said it was practical financial management since you'd demonstrated poor judgment by giving everything to me. We gave everything to save your home, Thomas said. I know that now with absolute clarity, the shame of how we repaid that sacrifice. He paused, collecting himself. That's why I'm here. Not to bring you back. I can see you've built something meaningful. But to apologize, to explain, to try rebuilding whatever connection might still be possible. What about Alexis? Thomas asked. We're separated. Have been for 2 months. The revelation startled them both. Because of us? Margaret asked. You were the catalyst, not the cause. Once I started questioning her actions toward you, other patterns became clear. Financial manipulations, emotional control, how she'd systematically isolated me from friends who disagreed with her. He sipped coffee before continuing. The final straw came when I discovered she'd been intercepting emails from David's old army buddies. They'd been trying to reach us for years about a memorial fund they'd established in his name. Alexis deleted everything, claiming dwelling on the past wasn't healthy. Thomas inhaled sharply. She's been controlling information flow for years, deciding what I should and shouldn't know, who I should and shouldn't contact. And the children? Margaret asked. We have joint custody. They're with me now, actually, staying with a friend in town while I found you. I didn't want to bring them until I knew how you'd receive me. Alexis allows them to see us? The court insists, Michael replied, and the children's therapist has been clear that maintaining relationships with loving grandparents is essential after the disruption they've experienced. Silence settled again, different in quality, less tension, more contemplation. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, Michael said. I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for a chance to rebuild trust, to let the children know their grandparents didn't abandon them, to create some new version of family connection that respects your independence and acknowledges my failure. The raw honesty disarmed final defenses. Thomas reached across the table, briefly covering his son's hand with his own, the first physical contact since their reunion. We'll need time, he said, but family remains family, even through the worst storms. From the kitchen doorway, Dorothy observed with quiet approval. When Margaret glanced her way, she offered a small nod before discreetly withdrawing. Would you like to meet the children? Michael asked. They're just at the inn on Maple Street. We could walk there, or I could bring them here. Bring them here, Margaret decided. This is our home now. They should see we're settled, not suffering. They'll be overjoyed. Lucas has been carrying that lighthouse everywhere, telling people his grandpa made it with magic hands. The simple report brought unexpected tears to Thomas's eyes. When Michael departed to retrieve Sophie and Lucas, promising to return within the hour, Thomas and Margaret remained at the booth. Dorothy emerged from the kitchen, coffee pot in hand. Families are complicated. Takes courage to attempt repair after damage. Thomas nodded slowly. Not sure where this leads. Life rarely gives perfect solutions, Dorothy continued, but sometimes it offers workable ones if we're brave enough to try. When Michael returned 40 minutes later, he was accompanied by 2 small whirlwinds who burst through the door ahead of him. 7-year-old Sophie, dark braids flying, spotted them immediately. Grandma! Grandpa! She shrieked, launching herself across the space. 5-year-old Lucas followed more cautiously, clutching a familiar wooden lighthouse in one mittened hand. The impact of Sophie's small body colliding with Margaret released something long frozen inside her. Arms automatically encircled her granddaughter, breathing in the familiar scent of children's shampoo and winter cold, feeling tiny arms squeeze with desperate strength. "You came back," Sophie whispered against her ear. Thomas knelt despite his protesting hip, opening arms to Lucas, who approached with the solemn intensity particular to young boys managing big emotions. "Is that my lighthouse?" Thomas asked gently. Lucas nodded. "I kept him safe. He sleeps by my bed so I don't forget you. I've missed you, my boy. Every single day." Michael watched from the doorway, eyes suspiciously bright. The scene before him represented both failure and hope. Scout, who'd been napping in his corner, rose to investigate, his movements quickening at familiar children's scent. "Scout!" both children cried, transferring excitement to the elderly dog, who received their attention with dignified patience. Over the children's heads, Thomas met his son's gaze directly. Acknowledgment passed between them, of damage done and bridges tentatively rebuilt. Not forgiveness yet, but openness to possibility. Epilogue. 6 months later, spring arrived in Millbrook with explosive color. Bradford pears blooming white along Main Street, daffodils erupting in planters outside shops, forsythia blazing yellow in residential yards. Thomas and Margaret stood in their apartment kitchen, preparing for visitors. Margaret pulled cinnamon rolls from the oven while Thomas arranged chairs around the dining table. "They should be here any minute," Margaret noted, glancing at the clock. Right on schedule, voices echoed from the diner below. Sophie's excited chatter, Lucas's deeper responses, he'd grown so much, Michael's steady bass, and an unfamiliar female voice. Margaret and Thomas exchanged glances. Michael had mentioned bringing someone. When they emerged from the stairwell, Sophie and Lucas rushed forward for hugs, while Michael hung back with a petite woman in her early 40s, auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, warm brown eyes assessing the apartment with genuine interest. "Mom, Dad, this is Diane," Michael said, a hint of nervous pride in his voice. "She's the children's art teacher. We've been seeing each other for a couple months." Diane extended her hand with a friendly smile. "I've heard so much about you both. It's wonderful to finally meet you." As they settled around the table with coffee and warm rolls, conversation flowed naturally. Diane asked thoughtful questions about their work at the diner, Thomas's furniture restoration, Margaret's quilting group. She spoke enthusiastically about Sophie's talent for drawing and Lucas's unexpected skill with clay. "She's nothing like Mom," Sophie announced with 7-year-old bluntness. "She actually listens when I talk." An awkward silence fell before Diane handled it gracefully. "Well, everyone has their own communication style. I'm just glad we understand each other." Later, while the children played with Scout in the living room and Diane helped Margaret in the kitchen, Michael and Thomas stepped onto the small balcony overlooking the town square. "She seems nice," Thomas observed carefully. "She is," Michael confirmed. "Nothing's certain yet. We're taking it slow for the kids' sake. But she's kind, patient. She actually wants to know what I think about things." "That's important," Thomas agreed. "I'm selling the condo," Michael added. "Too many bad memories. Too big for what we need. Found a smaller place in a good school district, closer to Diane's school." "And Alexis?" Divorce finalized last month. She fought for the house initially, but when the court saw her documented plans for guardianship and financial control..." Michael shook his head. "Her own evidence worked against her." Judge was not sympathetic. "And she's okay with the children spending time with us?" "She doesn't have much choice. The custody agreement specifically mentions maintaining relationships with paternal grandparents. Her lawyer advised her not to fight it. Would have looked worse." Thomas nodded, watching Sophie through the window as she showed Scout a drawing she'd made. "I'm sorry," Michael said suddenly, "for all of it. For not protecting you when I should have. For choosing the easy path instead of the right one. For—" "Michael!" Thomas turned to face his son. "We've had this conversation." You've apologized. You're making different choices now. At some point, we have to move forward rather than dwelling in what can't be changed. But I need you to know. We know. Thomas gripped his son's shoulder. We see the effort you're making, the therapy you're in, how you're prioritizing the children, the fact that you're here regularly, respecting our independence while rebuilding connection. Actions speak louder than repeated apologies. Michael's eyes glistened. Thank you. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Millbrook's Saturday morning unfold below. Farmers' market setting up in the square, neighbors greeting each other, the familiar rhythms of a community that had embraced two desperate seniors and given them purpose. Inside, Margaret and Diane had reached an understanding of their own. I want you to know, Diane said as she dried dishes, I'm not trying to replace anyone or force anything. The children talk about you constantly, Grandma's cinnamon rolls, Grandpa's magic hands. I'm just someone who cares about them and wants what's best for them. That's all we could ask, Margaret replied. They need stability, love, someone who sees them as people, not possessions or inconveniences. Michael's told me what happened. With Alexis. Diane chose her words carefully. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. It was, Margaret acknowledged, but it led us here. And here has turned out to be exactly where we needed to be. Through the doorway, they watched Thomas and Michael return from the balcony, their body language relaxed in a way that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Can we go to the park? Sophie asked. Show Diane the playground Grandpa helped fix? And the duck pond, Lucas added. They have babies now. The group bundled up despite spring warmth, old habits from winter dying hard, and made their way down to street level. Dorothy looked up from the lunch prep as they passed through the diner. You all headed to the park? The children want to show off the town, Margaret explained. Tell Samuel I'll have his usual ready when he comes by at 1, Dorothy called after them. The walk to the park took them through Millbrook's heart. They passed Rosa, who waved from the window of the alterations shop she'd opened with a microloan from the community bank. Frank's truck was parked outside his mother's house, and Ella sat on the porch in the warm sun, Frank beside her reading the newspaper aloud. Mr. Frank, Lucas called out. Hi, Mrs. Ella. Frank looked up, waving. Heard you had visitors this weekend. You all have a good time now. At the park, Sophie and Lucas raced ahead to the playground while the adults settled on a bench near the duck pond. Scout waded into the shallow water, carefully avoiding the ducklings paddling near their mother. It's beautiful here, Diane observed. Quiet, the kind of place people search for and rarely find. We weren't searching, Thomas admitted. We were running. But sometimes what you run to matters more than what you run from. Michael watched his children play, Sophie helping Lucas across the monkey bars, both of them laughing without the underlying tension that had marked their last year in the city. I was thinking, he said carefully, about maybe buying something nearby. Not in Millbrook, necessarily. I know the real estate's limited, but within an hour's drive. Somewhere we could spend weekends, summers. Let the kids have this, he gestured around, as part of their childhood. Margaret and Thomas exchanged glances. You wouldn't be opposed? Michael asked, reading their hesitation. We'd welcome it, Margaret said, as long as it's clear we're not resuming the previous arrangement. We have our own lives now, our own home, our own purpose. I understand completely, Michael assured them. I'm talking about being nearby, not living together. The kids need their grandparents, but on terms that work for everyone. Then yes, Thomas agreed. We'd like that very much. Later that evening, after Michael, Diane, and the children had departed, promises of returning in 2 weeks, hugs all around, Sophie sneaking one last cinnamon roll for the road, Thomas and Margaret found themselves back in their apartment as evening settled over Millbrook. They stood at their window, watching lights flicker on across the town square, the familiar evening ritual that had become as comforting as any they'd known in their old life. Do you ever regret it? Margaret asked. The house on Ashwood Lane. The life we had. Thomas considered carefully. I regret the circumstances that made leaving necessary. I regret the betrayal. I regret losing daily contact with the children during those months. But this? He gestured around their modest apartment. No, I don't regret this. Neither do I, Margaret admitted. It's smaller, simpler, but it's ours in a way that guest room never was. And we're not burdens here, Thomas added. We're contributors. Dorothy needs us. Samuel values my opinion on restorations. The kids at the library light up when you walk in for reading time. We matter, Margaret said simply. We always mattered, Thomas corrected gently. But here, people recognize it. Acknowledge it. That makes all the difference. A knock at their door interrupted the moment. Dorothy stood in the hallway, holding a covered dish. Made too much pot roast, she announced, though they all knew she'd made it specifically for them. Thought you might want it for tomorrow. You spoil us, Margaret said, accepting the dish. That's what family does. Dorothy's eyes twinkled. Besides, you earned it. That baking you did for the farmer's market yesterday? Sold out in under 2 hours. I've got people asking when you'll do it again. Really? Margaret felt a flush of pride. Really? You've got talent, Margaret. Always have. Just needed the right place to share it. After Dorothy left, Thomas and Margaret prepared for bed, their routines as comfortable and familiar as the 30-plus years of marriage that preceded their unexpected upheaval. As they settled into bed, Scout sighing contentedly from his place on the rug, Margaret spoke into the darkness. Do you think the children will understand someday? Why we left. I think Sophie already understands more than we give her credit for, Thomas replied. She's sharp. She sees things, and Lucas will understand when he's older. They'll know we didn't abandon them. We saved ourselves so we could be there for them on our own terms. I hope so. I know so, because we're showing them something important, that dignity matters, that you don't have to accept being diminished, even by family, that starting over is possible at any age. Heavy lessons for children so young. Essential lessons, Thomas corrected. They're learning that love doesn't mean accepting abuse. That family relationships should be built on mutual respect, not obligation or control. Those lessons will serve them well. Margaret reached for his hand in the darkness. When did you become so wise? Somewhere between the bus terminal at 2 a.m. and watching you make peace with our son this afternoon. Adversity either breaks you or teaches you. We're fortunate it chose teaching. Outside their window, Millbrook slept peacefully. Somewhere, a dog barked. Wind chimes sounded their random melody. The courthouse clock struck 9 with sonorous tones that echoed across the square. 3 months later, summer. The town's annual 4th of July celebration found Millbrook transformed. Red, white, and blue bunting draped from lampposts. The square hosted vendor booths, a small stage for local musicians, and tables for the community potluck that drew residents from miles around. Dorothy's kitchen had become command central, with Margaret coordinating dessert contributions while Thomas helped set up tables and chairs under the coordination of Frank and Samuel. Michael had indeed found a property, a small farmhouse 20 minutes outside Millbrook, with enough land for a garden and the chickens Sophie had begged for. He and Diane had spent weekends fixing it up, with Thomas occasionally lending his expertise and tools. The children now split time between the city, closer to their schools and Michael's work, and the farmhouse, with regular visits to Thomas and Margaret's apartment above the diner. As the afternoon celebration reached its peak, Margaret found herself surrounded by people who'd become her chosen family. Dorothy arranging pies, Rosa setting out her famous empanadas, Frank's mother, Ella, telling stories to captivated children, Samuel demonstrating wood-carving techniques to a cluster of curious kids, including Lucas. She watched Sophie help serve lemonade with the confidence of a child who knew she was valued, not tolerated. watched Michael and Diane work side by side setting up the sound system, their easy partnership a stark contrast to the tension that had defined his marriage to Alexis. Thomas appeared at her elbow, slipping an arm around her waist. "Quite a difference from last 4th of July, isn't it?" She nodded, remembering. Last year, they'd been in Michael's house, walking on eggshells, making themselves scarce, while Alexis hosted a party for her friends. They'd spent the evening in their small room, watching fireworks through a window, feeling like prisoners in their son's home. "You know what I realized?" Thomas said. "We've been here almost a year now. This September will mark 12 months. Has it been that long?" "And that short," he agreed. "Feels like we've been here forever and just arrived yesterday all at once." Mayor Henderson, no relation they'd established early on, though he found it amusing, took the stage to welcome everyone and thank the organizing committee, which now included Margaret as the coordinator of baked goods donations. "Before we start the music," Mayor Henderson announced, "I want to recognize some special community members." Thomas and Margaret Henderson joined us last year under difficult circumstances. They could have kept to themselves, licked their wounds, and moved on when things stabilized. Instead, they chose to dig in, contribute, and become vital parts of our community fabric. Margaret felt her face flush as applause rippled through the crowd. "Margaret's baking has elevated Dorothy's Kitchen to regional fame. We've got people driving from 3 counties for her cinnamon rolls. Thomas has restored furniture and buildings throughout town, preserving our history with skilled hands. But more than their work, they've shown us the power of resilience, the importance of community, and the truth that it's never too late to start over. Please join me in thanking them for choosing Millbrook." The applause grew louder. Sophie rushed over to hug Margaret's legs. Lucas wrapped himself around Thomas. Michael stood with Diane, clapping with particular vigor, his eyes bright with pride rather than shame. As the band started playing and people moved toward the dance floor, Frank approached with his mother. "Ella wanted to say something," he said. The elderly woman, lucid in this moment despite her advancing dementia, took Margaret's hands. "My Frank tells me you ran away from a bad situation, left everything behind." Margaret nodded. "That takes courage," Ella continued. "I ran away once, too. From a husband who thought his fists solved problems. Took my boy," she nodded toward Frank, "and $50 to my name. Everyone said I'd fail, said I couldn't make it alone. But I did. We did." She squeezed Margaret's hands. "You did, too. Don't ever forget that." "Thank you," Margaret managed around the lump in her throat. As evening approached and the band played on, as children chased lightning bugs and adults shared stories and laughter, Thomas and Margaret found themselves dancing, actually dancing, for the first time in years. Thomas's hip protested slightly, but not enough to matter. Not here, not now, surrounded by people who saw them as valued community members rather than burdens to be managed. "Happy?" Thomas asked as they swayed to a slow song. "More than I imagined possible a year ago," Margaret admitted. "You? I have you, I have my dignity, I have purpose, and I'm watching my son become the man I always believed he could be. Yes, I'm happy." As darkness fell and fireworks began painting the sky in brilliant explosions of color, the entire community gathered to watch. Thomas and Margaret stood with Scout between them, Michael and Diane behind them, Sophie and Lucas pressed against their legs. For the first time in years, maybe decades, Margaret felt completely, entirely at peace. Not because life was perfect or because all wounds had healed, but because she stood in a place where her presence was wanted, her contributions valued, her voice heard. She'd lost a house on Ashwood Lane, but she'd found something far more valuable, a home in Millbrook, built not on property deeds or family obligation, but on mutual respect, chosen connection, and the quiet dignity of two people who'd refused to surrender their autonomy even when it meant risking everything. As the grand finale lit up the sky in cascading gold and silver, Scout barked once, whether at the noise or in celebration, no one could say. The children laughed. Michael squeezed his parents' shoulders, and Thomas pulled Margaret close, whispering in her ear, "We made it, Maggie. Against all odds, we made it." She leaned into him, watching fireworks reflect in the glasses of their neighbors and friends, and whispered back, "No, we made something better. We made a life worth living, and in the warm summer night, surrounded by community and possibility, that truth felt more solid than any foundation they'd ever known.